Hey, welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey Rob, it's Diana.
Hey, it's Jackie.
What's up, guys?
Hi.
You all look kind of happy or sad. What's the matter? Let me put my hand on your shoulder.
Hey, are you okay?
Put your hand on my shoulder.
We're playing a little game of vocal charades and acting out one of our favorite, what is it, an emotion, a concept? Empathy.
It's a concept.
It is a concept.
It's a concept.
Or is it a behavior, guys? What
Whoa.
are we even doing?
This week, we are going to be talking about empathy here on our podcast, which, as always, is the Behavior Analytic Podcast discussing behavior analytic research. And like I just said, we'll be talking all about empathy, which, again, sounds like mentalistic hoo-ha. So we probably should start off by talking a little bit about what empathy is.
Hoopala.
All I know is that Deanna Troi on Star Trek Next Generation was an empath.
That was the example I was going to use, Diana. I'm really sad now.
It's because we don't even need to have empathy, Rob, because we actually have ESP.
Oh,
Yeah.
Like a mind meld.
Yeah. Did
So-
you know that Rob and I bought each other the same Christmas gift for several years running?
That's disgusting. And by the way, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. So I'm
In Star
Shocker!
Trek The Next Generation,
No, I won't-
Deanna
no.
Troi was a
She's the
was
most
a
beautiful
Luxon?
character.
What was she? Was that her race? Was she a Luxon?
I don't know.
She was some race that could read minds, but she was a half whatever it was. So she was an empath, so she could sense your feelings. So every
I can-
episode, they'd be like, oh no, it's a bad guy. And she'd go, oh, I sense great pain.
That's so lame. I'm so
No,
glad I
she's
never watched
awesome.
any of this. Okay.
That show's great.
Okay,
That's a
guys.
great show.
Guys, when I
I'm-
was like 12, I wrote some TNG fan fiction.
What, did you really?
Yes.
I've never heard this before.
So
I was such a nerd.
Now I want to hear
Thank God
this.
I've grown past it.
Screw this empathy garbage. I want to hear about your Star Trek story.
I think this is so funny that I'm not sure how we're friends sometimes. We have like almost nothing in common. You
That's
guys
why
have
we work.
you guys are like, oh yeah, reference. I'm like, but Hallmark movies, and you're like, shut up.
Well, we all do a podcast.
That's true. We all like behavior
It's
analysis.
ties that bind.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So empathy, one definition, as Diana had, is something that an alien race can do to read your feelings. But I don't know if that's going to really hold muster in the court of behavior analytic research. Let's see if we can dig little deeper.
So my article that I'm going to talk about today, spoiler alert, was by Schrandt et al. In 2009.
Is that a spoiler alert, or we're just going to say what article?
I mean, we
We'll
could
be
just say
discussing.
what articles we're going to
Why
talk
don't,
about.
why don't we just, let's break format a little bit, and why don't each of you say the article you're going to be discussing, and then talk about how the authors defined empathy, because they were similar, but one was a much better definition than the other.
All right, so I am doing a article published in 2009 in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis called Teaching Empathy Skills to Children with Autism. But creepily enough, when you look at on it online in the journal, like if you look at under Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, it says Physical Activity 13, and then it says the title.
Oh, I noticed that too.
Yeah.
Something went wrong.
Something went wrong there. So
In the
if you're
code.
looking for this when you are on the internet, it'll say Physical Activity 13, Teaching Empathy Skills to Children with Autism by Jessica Schrandt, Don Buffington Townsend, that's like one of my favorite names, and Claire Poulson, 2009. They defined empathy as a contextually appropriate response to a display of affect by a doll, puppet, or person that contained motor and vocal components in any order and began within 3 seconds of the end of the display.
Okay, well, that's like their behavioral definition.
Mm.
Yeah.
So my article that I'm going to review today is hot off the presses. It's from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2017, and it is titled Acquisition and Generalization of Complex Empathetic Responses Among Children with Autism by Paul Argott, Don Buffington Townsend, and Claire Poulson.
Do you know what I just noticed? Jessica Schrandt thanked Paul Argott in her thank you.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah?
They know each other.
Well, that makes sense because they're all of the rest of them are working on these articles together.
Yeah, that's fun.
So he's at UNF.
They're not, though. At this
They're not,
point.
but some of them must have been before.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Okay. One of the differences could be that this is a BAP article, and I feel like in BAP you get more time to postulate and formulate, etc., than you do in Java. So they were able to, go into a little more, I think, on the behavioral mechanisms that might be at play when you're talking about empathy. But the definition that they provide that I quoted, they're actually quoting from Wandra and Ellsworth. And it was that empathy is, quote, vicariously feeling what another person feels as a result of an event that they have experienced, end quote. Now, if you think about that for a minute, the challenge here is that we never quite know what another person is feeling. Is this right, Rob?
That is very true.
Right, because feeling, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's just
absolutely it exists.
Right.
But it's covert.
It's covert.
Overt.
Were you trying to say covert covertly so we couldn't hear
Yeah.
you?
It's covert.
It's covert behavior, meaning it's behavior that's occurring inside the skin that someone else cannot observe from the outside.
Like you might think from my opening, I'm always having like a great time, but I'm really a seething mass of rage underneath.
I can tell
But you
because
can't know.
I am part empath
Oh.
as well, so I always know, but someone else might not.
No.
I'm also raging.
I can tell that too.
Somebody.
I'm an INFJ, you guys.
I don't know
so-
what that means.
What's that? Are you sick? Are you okay?
It's on the Myers-Briggs personality test, which of course we know. We should do an episode on that. That's all a bunch of hooey. But I am...
The episode's done.
But that's what I come out as, an INFJ. It's less than 1% of the population.
Wow.
And the job that they recommend is author.
Okay.
That's hilarious.
I know. Yeah, fits me well. Anyway, can't directly observe what someone else is feeling, so that makes it challenging to know what someone else is feeling.
It's true.
Someone can tell you what they're feeling, but then what you're observing is their verbal behavior versus their actual emotional state.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be that level of impasse. However, we can gather information about how someone's feeling based on overt characteristics that can be observed, and they list those as 4 different things: verbal statements, intonation of voice, facial expressions, and gestures that are used. Okay?
That's the empathic response.
But it's also, I think all of those to me also qualify as behavior on the part of the person that you're observing.
They are engaged in those 4 things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the empathy itself is your 4 response. Your 4 behaviors that are in response to theirs.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you fall, then
I will catch you.
I'll be waiting.
Yes. So that makes sense. And just so we are all aware, Reingold and Hay have called this prosocial behavior. And it
Sure.
and it deals with like empathetic behavior, perspective taking, turn taking, sharing. And what we found is that these types of behaviors typically emerge as early as 18 months, but they may not necessarily emerge in a child.
Not all 18-month-olds are sharing.
Right.
And,
I was like,
and showing empathy, but there are
some.
germs of those behaviors.
Or they're engaging
there.
in a portion of those
Right.
those 4 responses to
Yeah.
someone else's.
Yeah, they may do the face. They may have like a face like, oh.
Yeah. Or
Right.
young children will observe when someone else is upset, but
Yeah.
they may not have the piece where they go to them
And
or
say,
offer
are you
assistance.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they have seen some of that, but we may not see those types of behaviors displayed in entirely in a child diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder.
Mhm.
Right.
They
And-
also suggest that perspective taking doesn't occur until 4 years of age. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that makes sense that the prosocial behavior, this gets lumped in with that. And the article that I had also was trying to identify why evolutionarily does empathy occur. And they said it may have something to do with that overall category of prosocial behavior
Right.
and imitation of others,
Yep.
which sort of gets you buy-in with the herd, so to
Mhm.
speak, right?
Yeah. I know that if I'm, what in my article, they say that peers and family members may initiate social interaction more frequently if students are more empathetic. So if you hurt yourself and someone comes and says, "Oh, are you okay?"
Yeah.
You may be more likely to increase social interactions.
That makes sense too. And they also were working to figure out, what's the behavioral function for empathy. They said, likely Empathetic responses are conditioned social stimuli that we respond to in the form of nonverbal stimuli and positive verbal interaction. So smiling, saying something nice to someone else is perceived as a reinforcer, and then that makes that behavior continue within that dyad, right?
So we have empathy. It's sort of under the umbrella term of pro-social behaviors that have some sort of a, conditioned social reinforcer function. And one of the reasons that these articles exist, and a number of articles before, I think both articles had very nice descriptions of the articles leading up to these two.
Yes, they did.
They really did, yeah.
Is we have children with autism who, for some reason, don't seem to naturally develop many of these empathetic behaviors without some sort of additional training. And each of the articles sort of gets into why that might be, and then they sort of go back and forth. But let's kind of, same way we did the discussion of what is empathy, what do the authors think about why that happened? Why that is a phenomenon of children with autism not engaging in empathetic behavior.
Right. I mean, one of the pillars of the diagnosis is difficulty in social communication, right? And empathy requires both social interaction and often communication as well. Although you can have empathy without having verbal communication. Mm-hmm. So this particular behavior falls directly in the middle of the Venn diagram of the type of behavior that should most likely be challenging for an individual with that diagnosis. So I think it makes sense that we would see it fall here. Same with imitation, perspective taking, joint attention, etc. Right? All of those pro-social behaviors fall into that same arena. The Argott article proposed that likely the types of subtle social cues that one would need to attend to in order to engage in an empathetic response are likely not very salient for an individual with autism who doesn't have
complex.
Highly complex, yeah. Who doesn't have that history of social reinforcement.
And Jackie, what about the Schrandt article?
So the Schrandt article proposes that approach deficits in social behavior are a stimulus control problem. So just like you talked about, Diana, about, there's very complex stimuli within the environment. One characteristic of an autism spectrum disorder is stimulus over-selectivity, which is the tendency to respond to a limited number of cues when presented with complex stimuli. So they're suggesting that if we could teach new discriminations, then we could teach individuals to tend to more pertinent stimuli within the environment and then not to irrelevant stimuli in the environment. They say that it may not be a deficit, I love that word, I always say it wrong, a deficit of skill, but it just may be a deficit in attending to those relevant stimuli in the environment, which is pretty neat.
Okay. I think the reinforcement piece we have to consider as well. So if the overarching reinforcer for engaging in empathetic response is a social one, then an individual who doesn't find that reinforcing is going to be much less likely to engage in the behavior.
Yeah. So pretty neat. Putting them together, I think that really, putting both
nailed it.
ideas together really gives us a more holistic approach of looking at what empathy is and what it's not. And one thing I love about both articles is in the introduction, they really reviewed studies that use modeling, prompting, and reinforcement. And those are the most frequently used training procedures that were effective for teaching social skills. One thing that the Schrandt article suggested is that it would be really important to train multiple exemplars within a specific stimulus class. So show a wide variety of reasons why you'd be sad, happy, excited, or frustrated. Also, to train with a discriminative stimulus compound, so not make those SDs less simple and more complex, because that's what you're going to see in the natural environment. And then program for generalization to assess whether novel...
Train and hope.
Yeah, right? That's really what they're looking for.
No. What they're not doing.
No, that's what they're not doing, yeah. Let's just hope. But they're assessing generalization both with novel stimuli in the training environment and in the untrained setting with novel people. Yeah.
So we have all this literature looking at teaching social skills to children with autism. We have a clear deficit in many children with autism in terms of not engaging in empathetic behavior, not engaging in empathetic behavior is one of those pro-social behaviors that I think when it's lacking is very noticeable and makes it, definitely puts a barrier for the development of certain social interactions. So we put our problem and our technology together, and we come up with 2 studies that take similar but different tacts of training empathy. So since there's similarities between the 2, why don't we go in, what's the word? Chronological. Why don't we go in chronological order, starting with Jackie in your 2009 Schrandt article.
Teleological order?
Teleological order.
What's that? By time.
Oh.
Right?
I don't know anything.
Okay.
I know.
So what they wanted to do...
Start with the puppets. I want you to start with the puppets.
I'm starting with the puppets.
Do the whole thing in a Kermit voice. Go.
I'm not good at that. I'm not good at being creative at all. Just, everyone will know this about me.
Jackie here. Hi ho. Jackie here. And this is Kermit the Frog, who's very tired.
I'm like really bad at that.
You sound like a lugubrious donkey.
Yeah, I never have claimed to be a creative person, nor have I ever been able to be like cartoony without me being my normal self.
You just be you, Jackie.
Yeah.
That's all you need to be.
I mean, like, little children love me because I look like a Muppet and my voice is naturally high-pitched and annoying. So children love me. Teenagers hate me, but children love me.
It's okay. You're only a teenager a short period of time.
That's really true.
Yeah.
That's really true. Okay, so what they want to do is to assess a treatment package that consists of affective, discriminative stimulus compounds, prompt delays, modeling through auditory scripts, manual prompts, behavioral rehearsals, and reinforcement to teach empathy skills. And one thing that they used some puppets and dolls. So they used it in a pretend play setting, which is really awesome.
I love that.
Me too. And one rationale was because they just didn't have people. Right? So you don't always just have rando people just waiting to act out little plays for you when you're
don't?
No. And so I love that because this is something that you can use, right? So if you don't have just rando people hanging out, they wanted to assess if you could make a little
have some puppets lying around.
Right? And that's actually very appropriate, right, for this age group.
Yeah.
So that's really cute. And so then what they did is once they trained those empathetic skills with puppets, then they assessed it with actual people.
What kind of puppets?
They had a variety of puppets, I think.
Sock? Muppet puppet?
No. They just say...
Just cutie little fuzzy puppets? Like stuffed animal puppets?
They don't even tell you. We don't know what kind of puppets they were.
Okay.
But there was a variety of puppets.
Okay.
So I can tell you that.
Okay.
Variety. I'm hoping that there were the puppets with the big faces and the big mouths that have flat, like Sesame Street puppets, and then when you talk, they're like flat, flat, flat.
I hope so too.
Okay. Let's imagine
But that's totally what I'm imagining.
Me too.
Moving forward. Probably a blue one and maybe a purple one.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And they both have, one has pigtails and one has like a comb over.
Okay.
Okay, good. We're there. So the participants were 4 children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. They ranged in age from 4 years, 5 months to 8 years, 9 months. But it should be noted that the 8 years, 9 months obtained a PPVT score of 3 years, 11 months. So puppets were age appropriate for all of these students. They conducted their sessions in a small little room. And they used a language master, which seemed to me when I was reading this, I'm like, why did they do this? But it's a little thing there where you have a little card and you press down the card and then it plays a script for you. So they used that for the audio scripting. I love the name, Language Master. So they had
one of those buttons that you press and it talks to you. Yeah.
The affective discriminative stimulus compounds contain 1 motor and 1 vocal component. So there was brief vignettes where the students would sit and watch.
I love that word.
I know, me too. Watch these little puppet shows or vignettes, and they received tokens for attending and sitting at various points. So there was no time where they got it. So it was just whenever they were sitting. And so they had vignettes for sadness, happiness, and frustration. But it should be noted that only 1 of the 4 participants viewed all of the vignettes. So 3 of the participants only hung out in the vignettes of sadness and pain.
Okay.
And then one participant saw, they did a multiple probe design across vignettes.
Okay.
Did they explain that in the article?
They did not know. It's only in the graphs.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if it was, they just had started with one kid and they're like, we don't have time to do all of the different empathetic responses and just switched it for the other 3 participants.
Yeah, they didn't explain it. But vignettes were randomly assigned to training and probe conditions, and so what happened is, let's say the sadness and pain category, the instructor was holding a puppet, the puppet bumped against the table, and then the puppet said, ouch, and touched its leg.
These are good puppets, because they're describing things that I don't think a puppet couldn't do is just like a little finger puppet.
Yeah, these are Sesame Street puppets. It doesn't say that, but we just like that.
That's what we're saying.
They're Sesame Street puppets.
You had a second person under the table playing the right arm.
Yeah.
We need a lot of grad students for this article.
Yeah, so some examples of discriminative stimuli were I don't feel good and sitting down, so you see the motor response and the vocal response. My stomach hurts and rubbing stomach. Bump my head and I burned my hand and grabbing toast and dropping it. So these are
in the opposite order.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. So those were the training stimuli. The responses were like, are you okay? And patting the arm. Are you all right? And patting the arm. And it's okay. And patting the arm. A trial began when the instructor presented a vignette with the doll. There was a prompter who sat behind the participant, waited for the interval for the response, and then delivered a consequence after the training trials, or gave feedback if the student did not engage in that specific response. In baseline, they just ran the vignette, and then if the student engaged in anything, they just said thank you, which I love. And I'll bring up when Diana's oldest child was like 3, I would say, I love you, and he'd go, thank you.
Every time.
Every single time.
You.
Thank you. Like, oh, this is awkward. He says I love you now.
Yeah.
But I think that's funny. So then the treatment package was training consisted of 30 trials. So 7 training and 3 non-training probe stimulus trials per response category. They were presented in random order. So the prompter delivered both the manual prompt and the auditory prompt by pressing down the language master. So the prompter really needed to have their exercise pants on because they were doing a lot, right? That seems like a hard job.
Do they still use language masters anywhere? Because I remember there was like a good 2-3 years when I think every like little book or training manual talked about using these things. Like, you get your magnetic tape and it runs through. And it just sounds like a technology that came out and went so fast.
Is a language master not what I'm thinking it is? Because I'm thinking it's a big.
It's not
what we
the
always
big
called
button.
a big button.
No, it's not the big button.
It's like a magnetic. It's like a magnetic tape.
Magnetic tape
strip that goes through.
Do you use that with your slide rule?
Yeah, it's not the button.
Okay, I can't.
It's like
a
little
envision
card.
What this is.
That's what I imagined. We'll get a picture up and show you.
Use microfiche with it.
No, it seems like the sort of technology you would use before
in the
iPhones.
70s. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like a very 70s technology
thing.
that I think it is.
And the name is very 70s. Language master.
Yeah, I don't think they had that technology in the 70s.
A beast master.
Yeah. And so just so you know that initially the prompter provided manual and auditory prompts immediately. And then following 3 sessions, if the student engaged in an independent response, the prompter used a 1-second delay and then increased by 1 second following each session in which the participant responded correctly for at least 4 of the 7 trials. If they didn't, they bumped down a second. If they did, they bumped up to a second for a maximum of 3 seconds. Make sense?
Cool.
Yeah.
Very technological.
And the only other procedural variation that I think is important to note is that if the participant did not respond to the language master, so if the language master was going, they did not have any auditory response, then the prompter would just then verbally prompt what they wanted them to say until they said it. So it would be like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Until they did it. And then generalization occurred where they interspersed generalization through training sessions where they had vignettes similar to the training dolls, and then they also did generalization to non-training people and settings, which is neat to see what happened. So they used a multiple baseline design across participants to assess the extent to which the treatment package was effective. And then Josh, like we said before, had a multiple baseline in his own
Right.
across response categories. So he did multiple empathetic
it was
response
excitement.
Excitement and happiness.
Excitement / happiness.
Pain / sadness. And then frustration.
Okay. So what is kind of interesting is you're talking about these generalization probes, and then examples of those are the same as training. They just happen to be generalization. Like,
right.
One says, "Oh no," and the puppet wipes their eyes with a tissue. One says, "I cut my finger," and they have scissors. And one says, "I have a headache," and they're holding their head. So they're the exact same. But what's interesting, I think, is that it's a puppet. So there's no change, I assume, in the puppet's facial expression.
Right.
Right? So it's only based on the verbal and the action.
The motor. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, because in the real world, they have actually said that
there's more to go on.
There's more to go on.
Sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
You really are.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. They did IOA, which was great. Procedural integrity, which was good. And they ran social validity, my fave. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's talk about the results. So remember here, which is okay, during baseline, they did provide tokens for attending, but not for responses. So they made sure that there wasn't any tokens following the delivery of a response. They only said thank you. And so here, they're looking at the number of empathy responses to displays of sadness with the training stimuli across sessions for Jacob, Luke, and Allie. And the black circles, the filled circles, are the motor responses. And the open circles are the vocal responses. And for all participants, you saw very low rates, aka 0, across both motor and vocal responses. We would think, at the 0-second delay prompting, there was 0% independent responses, right? Because you can't. But then as soon as you went to 1-second delay for all participants, you did see a slight increase in both motor and vocal responses, and a bigger increase for Luke and Jacob and a smaller increase for Allie. But then once each participant reached the 3-second delay prompt, you saw consistent high rates of responding in both the motor and vocal responses. So everyone was doing it, which is fun. So puppets rule. And then for our friend Joshua, again, we saw similar results. Low motor and vocal responses in baseline, and then as soon as treatment hits that 1-second prompt delay, you see an increase in motor and vocal responses up to criterion following the 3-second delay of prompts. So then you see
he rocked it.
He really did.
Across all his response categories. Hooray! And then what happened after the puppets, Jackie? Because I'll be honest, if it stopped it, and then they learned this with puppets, I would say, throw this research out, it's worthless.
They didn't, no. They looked at then they did it across people, person 1 and person 2, and it should be noted that person 1 was the prompter. And
familiar face.
Yeah, and person 2 was not. For Jacob, Luke, and Allie, again, we're looking at the number of empathy responses in the sadness pain category with non-training people and settings across sessions, and there was nothing happening in baseline, and then, an okay amount of things happening in the generalization session.
It was a little variable.
Yeah, it was. So person 1, remember person 1 they had familiar with. Across 3 sessions, they saw initially no motor and vocal responses displayed, but then on the 2nd and 3rd session, we saw almost 100% accuracy for motor and vocal, but not quite. And then for person 2, it was slightly lower, so it went from 1 to 4 number of empathy responses where they were looking for 7. Nicely, it looks like when they got it right for person 2, they got it right because the motor and vocal responses are the same. So maybe there was a few that they just didn't get. And then for Luke, it was all over the place. For Luke, it appeared that his vocal responses increased to the non-training settings and people, but his motor responses did not. And we saw the same for Allie. For the most part, for her vocal responses had increased following training, but her motor did not. They did a little bit, but not to 100%. And Josh is our main man here. So in generalization assessment, he acquired all of the vocal and motor responses across all 3 different response categories. So he rocked it.
He totally rocked it.
He really did.
Yeah.
Was the baseline in the generalization probes, was that the same baseline as from the last graph, or was that a new baseline with the new people in the new setting?
You know, I was thinking the same thing
Because
while I was looking at the graphs.
I don't think I picked it up when I was reading
I
it, but
didn't either.
now hearing you talk about
Josh's data are different. His baseline data are different.
They did say that they did intermittent. Remember, they did intermittent probe.
Okay.
Yeah, did the intermittent probe trials. So they probably did it during when they were training.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, they said they did intermittent probe trials, and they did say that in the procedures, and I actually said it too, which is funny. And then as I was looking at the graphs, I was like, wait a minute. But yeah. You know, these results they're hopeful. I love it when I see some hopeful results.
Yeah.
They did show some generality with empathetic responding. They saw some responding generalized from training to non-training probe stimuli for 4 participants. They saw empathetic responding to actual people in a non-training setting for 2 of the participants. And most of the teachers scored social validity questions as high, as this is an important topic to discuss. But it should be noted that all these teachers worked in a school for kids with autism, so they had a little more knowledge. So it may have been different if someone that didn't have as much knowledge watched these videos. Yeah. So another limitation of the study was that they said that the language master probably could have been done away with.
Yeah.
Right.
Considering they just had to use vocal
prompts anyway. Yeah. So, and I thought that too, like, why didn't they just use vocal prompts? But they were probably trying to make sure everything was the same.
You got to use that grant money for something, right?
Yeah. And they also suggested that the dolls and puppets were used because it was easy, but it didn't help promote generality. So it would be really important to try this with real people.
Cool.
Yeah.
Unless you're on the Sesame Street set.
Yeah, right.
You probably just want to skip that step.
Yeah, but I like that. I think that this is helpful, and I love that they use multiple exemplars.
Yes.
I love that they didn't do anything like super crazy, right? Super fancy. Like this could be something that I could do tomorrow. Like I could go to work, pull out some puppets,
Pull the sock off your foot.
put some googly eyes on it, and then rock. But right, so it's something easy, and it's based on not like fancy tools of our trade, right? But like basic foundational principles, prompting and reinforcement, and I love that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it's an often overlooked skill that we don't necessarily think to target, right? Because you know the participants in your study and then the participants in my study are both appropriate groups for this type of skill acquisition, in that they seem to have a lot of other social skills already. At least my group does. So they're the kind of kids that are ready for this type of skill. And sometimes when you get those types of kids, you're like, well, they can already have a conversation with someone and they look pretty good. You're not sure what to work on, right? So this can be a really appropriate skill for highly verbal students who have difficulties with social interaction.
Okay. Well, I'd like to see what the future of research in empathy holds when we move beyond puppets. But before we do that, why don't we take a quick break? We'll be right back.
Hey, ABA Inside Trackers, it's me, Jackie.
And it's me, Diana. Jackie, I'm really excited to be joining you in this commercial because I've also started my career path at Regis.
Yay! Yes, that's right, folks. If you want to start an exciting career in applied behavior analysis, you should check out the Master's and Certificate program in Applied Behavior Analysis at Regis College. You can learn from both Diana and me. Here are some interesting facts about our program.
90% of our 2016 graduates passed the BCBA exam during their first time taking the exam. We think this is a really great testament to the program.
we started an on-campus autism center in fall 2017. The center provides behavior analytic services to children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder right at Regis College. The center will offer employment opportunities for some of our graduate students. Students working at the center will receive partial tuition remission.
We also offer opportunities for paid clinical placements and graduate assistantships starting in the student's first year. So all of our grad students are currently working in the field either part-time or full-time.
Yes, we help students identify their practicum placements because we think it's imperative students receive excellent training and experience in the application of behavior analysis. Therefore, we screen placements to ensure students receive high-quality practicum placements.
We are approved by the BACB to provide intensive practicum. Students complete at least 750 hours, but most complete much more over the course of 3 semesters. Across that time, students complete a professional portfolio that includes completing a variety of application exercises, such as conducting assessments, developing behavior plans, training curriculum, and more. This portfolio functions as a way to ensure students are learning the essentials of being an effective behavior analyst and is a great way to showcase your work at job interviews upon graduation. I love it.
Students enroll in 2 courses per semester and graduate in a little under 2 years. Our courses are offered in traditional classroom and hybrid formats, which enables a student to focus on one course at a time while still completing the program quickly.
All of the faculty are PhD-level BCBAs with strong applied and research backgrounds in ABA, and all have published papers in respected peer-reviewed journals.
We ensure small class sizes so that all students receive personalized attention from their professors, and advisors are easily accessible to meet with students.
There is also an invited lecture series at Regis, which involves inviting outside experts in ABA to speak on specialized topics relating to practicing ABA, and these are really great opportunities for students to learn from a variety of experts in the field in addition to their professors.
And last summer we completed an international service trip to Iceland, which we plan to do every other year.
Although we train students to work effectively with individuals diagnosed with autism, we also have opportunities for students to work with individuals with a variety of diagnoses and typically developing individuals as well. In addition, the coursework covers the broad applications of ABA with respect to solving socially important problems.
There are opportunities for students to be involved in faculty research as well.
We have a great location. We're just 12 miles from the center of Boston.
So check us out at www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Keep responding.
And we're back, and we're coming straight in with our very first secret code word. Now, for those of you new to the show, ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. So by listening to our show, you can earn continuing education credits. You can just follow the link in the info page or go to the website, abainsidetrack.com, and go get CEUs. You're going to need a couple bits of information, including 2 secret code words spread throughout this episode. And the first of those code words is dinosaur. DINOSAUR. Open the door, get on the floor, everybody walk. Your dinosaur. Dinosaur. All right, let's move on from puppet training of empathetic skills to training with real people. And Dinah, that brings us to your article.
Real live people.
Real live people. Now, reading these 2 articles together, I read the 2017 article first, and then going back and reading the 2009 article, it really felt like, we probably could have skipped this whole puppet tangent. I'm glad this happened, but man, we probably could have just jumped right into the 2017 training article, because they take this.
Maybe it was their lifelong dream to be able to do research with puppets. Why are you gonna crush their dream?
I think it's awesome though, because if you don't have people around,
someone has to operate the puppet though.
You. Duh.
I'm envisioning like a giant Cookie Monster puppet.
You need someone to puppet and someone to prompt from behind. So you need multiple people to do this training.
I guess you need 2.
Yeah.
Minimum of 2. But if you want to do a fancy puppet, so
you
they
need
can touch
more
their
people
arm.
for this one.
For Argott?
I don't know that you do.
No, it's either the same or
They're the
even
same
less.
people that published it, except for Paul and Jessica. So they're just building.
So perhaps they needed to sow their wild puppet oats before they got to this article, but I think you listeners will find that the 2017 article is a bit more of a, I think, kind of an overall elegant presentation of empathy training.
Well, it's happening almost 10 years later, right? So
It's time to rethink their puppets.
all research is building upon the previous research. So they're standing on the shoulders of giants. Some of those giants were themselves.
All right, well, let's hear about how things have changed.
Right, so they did a really lovely review, actually, of the research that had been done in this area thus far. A big portion of their introduction was highlighting those 4 different pieces that are important incorporations of an empathetic response, which again were verbal statement, intonation, facial expression, and gesture. Okay, so their plan and their purpose of their study is to extend the current research by teaching all 4 of those components together and calling that a complex empathetic response. And then secondary to that, to again work on promoting generalization to untaught stimuli, which they'd done in the past, but they wanted to continue to show, which is a noble and worthy undertaking always. So for this study, they had 4 participants. They were ranged in age from 10 to 12 years old. They actually don't give us individual demographic information on them, but we have George, Derek, Jared, and Janine.
Best names ever.
Yeah?
I love those names.
Cool. They are good names. All were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. They all attended a private school for children with similar disabilities. They were referred to the study through anecdotal reports. They did not engage in empathetic responses. However, they did seem to have a high number of skills in other areas, so all of them spoke in 3 to 6 word sentences. They engaged in minimal stereotypic behavior, minimal disruptive behavior. All of them had experience with token economies, and all of them had experience with modeling as a prompting strategy. So they were in just the right spot, it sounded like, to work on this type of skill. So, both of these studies, of course, are going to report good results. That's what gets published. But it's important, I think, to recognize that not every student that you work with can you throw into an empathy study and have them show this type of responding, right? There's a lot of prerequisite skills required and a lot of other more foundational social skills that would need to be built before you embark on teaching empathy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this study was a multiple baseline design across responses. So each participant, unlike Jackie's study, each participant did all 3 of the responses. So they were each their own graph, if that makes sense. And there were 3 empathetic responses that they were teaching: response to joy, response to frustration, and response to pain. So they had basically those 4 dependent variables that I mentioned. So they all engaged in statements, intonation, facial expression, and gesture. I wrote down table 1.
Oh, table 1 describes
The different responses.
So, like, the statements of empathy include "that's great" and "that's awesome." The appropriate gesture would be giving a high five. The facial expression is a smile. And the appropriate intonation is a high pitch and a lively intonation.
That's great!
Like that.
I love articles where they take what one at first glance would think of as that's a complex social behavior, and they break it down into a table. It just makes everything seem so much more organized and orderly than real life, right?
I like this one.
Yeah.
The pain. Can I get you something? Hold one hand out with palm up. The facial expression is raised eyebrows.
Unless you can't raise your eyebrows, in
and
which
then
case
it's
it was
lowered.
down
No,
eyebrows.
it was supposed to be lowered eyebrows, which Derek and Janine, they were able to prompt, but for George and Jared, they were unable to ever prompt the lowered eyebrows, so they just went with raised.
Yeah, and then the appropriate intonation was low pitch and sad intonation.
Can I get you something?
That's so good, Diana.
Thank you. And then for frustration, the responses were, can I help you or let me help? Place hand on chest with palm facing body. See, Rob, that was the inappropriate response. Raised eyebrows and rising pitch. Can I help you? Oh my gosh, can I help you?
That's nice.
Thank you.
I like that motor response. I'm going to do that tomorrow.
It just seems so dramatic.
But, if someone
Oh,
seems
here's
upset.
one they wrote. It's a monocle fly off eye.
Drop teacup.
Dowager faints on the divan. There's all sorts in that table. It's a busy table.
Okay.
I just made those two up. That's just me.
What? All right, so that's what they were teaching. Within each session, which I'll explain what the sessions are in a minute, they did 12 trials for each type of response. So joy, frustration, and pain. 9 of those were teaching trials. 3 of those were generalization probes built in to the study. And now I can tell you what they did, which was initially they did a baseline in which these varying scenarios were presented by a person, by the way, not a puppet. If the participant happened to engage in the appropriate empathetic response, they said, "Thank you." And
love that.
Yeah. Actually, my study said that they responded naturally as you would to that. But the example they gave was thank you. And then the training, which they called the prompting and the reinforcement phase, provided tokens and praise for correct responding, which could be traded in at the end of the training session. They were looking for all 4 components, so the statement, the gesture, the facial expression, and the intonation, all to be expressed independently. If they were not, if they were, then that's when they got the token. If they were not, then they started on the prompting hierarchy. So it was a least to most prompting hierarchy, in which the least prompt given was a video model demonstrating the whole response.
No, it's just the second article in a row with a similar group of researchers where they're like, we need to have this technological piece. And then newsflash in the discussion, they're like, I don't know if we really needed that technological piece.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's their hallmark.
Yeah.
I like the idea of a video model prompt.
I like the idea of it. And that's all I liked about it.
Okay. Well, it seems like a good place to start, right? If you think about least restrictive to most restrictive, it is the least restrictive
It is really the least
prompt,
restrictive.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So they started with a video model prompt. If that did not produce the desired response for all 4 components,
everyone cried.
Right.
Yeah.
Then there was a chance to respond to the crying. No, just kidding.
Right.
Then they moved to the in vivo
Yes.
response. So the experimenter modeled the correct empathetic response. And if that didn't work, then they provided a manual and verbal prompt. And they noted that this always works.
Mm-hmm.
Which I say in my Zootopia voice now.
Yeah.
Manual prompting always works.
I haven't seen that show.
I know. It's okay.
Okay, thanks.
Manual prompting for facial expression is like
That's pretty hard.
moving someone's face around as though it is a clay mask.
We were reading this in the car as we are wont to do, and I was reading it, and then as we got to that part, I said, "Oh, like this," and I just kind of jammed my hand into Diana's face as she was
while I'm driving,
sort of moving her mouth in a frowny face.
It was weird. Yeah, but we'll talk more about that later. They were receiving tokens for correct responding. They were also, for the untrained portions of the multiple baseline design, they received tokens on a VR2 schedule just for attending in order to sort of maintain their session behavior at that point in time. And then mastery criteria were 89% independent and correct responding across 2 consecutive days per category. Once they mastered it, then they tested for generalization with those 3 other stimuli in each category that they had been probing. And they, 1 time per week, they used a novel adult probe. And then maintenance was tested 6 weeks later, where nothing had been presented in between, to see how they did at that point in time.
So pretty, fairly similar, but different in important ways.
Real people, more complex empathetic behavior being prompted.
Right.
Still some sort of a weird technology trying to be used in lieu of just typical
good old
standard human prompts. Jam your hands in kids' faces prompts.
Okay, anyway.
They also did a nice social validity piece here, which maybe incorporated some of the limitations that you felt
I think so too.
were in the previous one. So here they used 17 psychology graduate students who were completely unrelated to the work as far as I could tell. They watched 18 clips across all the participants. The first 3 baseline sessions and the last 3 training sessions for everyone. They rated those 1 to 5 on a Likert type scale. 1 being, I see no empathy. 5 being, this looks totally natural. And
I like that response.
Nice.
That's such a dad joke, you dad.
Baseline sessions, the mean score that they gave those was a 2.7, and training sessions, last 3 training sessions, the mean response they gave those was a 4.3. So, improvement.
Cool. Nice. Yeah. I love that they're not perfect. I love it when social validity assessments are not perfect, because that means that people actually thought about it.
Right. And let's be honest, this is a really tough
it is.
behavior that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Here, right? And they reported that previous literature had noted that the facial expressions continued to look mechanical after training, right? In their social validity findings. And here they felt that they had overcome that to some degree, in that their social validity ratings were pretty good. And part of that, their hypothesis on that was they also included the intonation in the speech, and they said maybe those two are kind of tied together. So if you're providing the appropriate intonation in your voice, then it's makes you have the right facial expression, for lack of a more scientific way to say that. Results. Every time I see Joy, I think that that's a participant's name. Like, these are the results for Joy. No. So results for George. George went through the emotions in the order of joy, frustration, and pain. Responding in baseline for all conditions was at 0%. And upon the introduction of training, so we saw an immediate increase in his independence with the instructor, and then the probe sessions followed pretty closely behind, so that following about 10 to 12 training sessions, he was independent in both the training stimuli and the generalization stimuli. And the same was true for frustration and pain, except that he acquired those skills even faster. Derek, we saw a similar pattern of responding in that baseline remained at 0. And he learned these skills in the order of pain, joy, and frustration. It took him a few more sessions in order to really reach mastery criterion for those. However, he did reach that for all sets. They had the follow-up data available for Derek. However, his follow-up data were marginal at best, I would say. So we did see some decrease in independence, pretty significant decrease in independence for follow-up. But mind you, he hadn't had experience contacting these stimuli or the contingencies for 6 weeks.
Right. That's a long time.
It is a long time. Jared was the only participant who showed some independence in baseline, and that was specifically for the joy response. So when the experimenter said, "Look, I did my puzzle," he said, "That's great," or some piece of that. Yeah. So he either these were more salient stimuli to him by some record, or perhaps he had worked on this in some capacity with his therapist in the past. However, the responding even for joy, which was actually the third, he did frustration, pain, and then joy, the responding was nowhere near the mastery criteria level. So he did train on all 3 sets of stimuli, and upon implementation of training, he saw pretty regular and quick increases across the sets of stimuli, such that he was at mastery criterion for all 3. Follow-up data were a little more variable, but he maintained all. I say joy was a little more variable, but for frustration and pain, he maintained those skills at follow-up. Finally, let me tell you about Janine. Janine learned the skills in the order of frustration, joy, and pain. She's had a few points of independence in the frustration category. However, it was only once or twice that they saw some responding there. However, once training was implemented for frustration, she saw an immediate increase in independence and then maintained that skill over time. Joy was much more variable. Eventually, they got up to mastery criterion, but it took several sessions, and then they actually did not initiate training for pain for her. So we only have the
Did they say why?
It says time constraints. That's all we got. Maybe the summertime happened. Maybe it was time to graduate.
It was 41 sessions of baseline.
Time to graduate.
Right. It's a lot of baseline.
Yeah. So overall, this was a successful treatment and intervention for these participants. We saw some really nice increases in their empathetic responding. They generalized those skills to the probe sessions. And then the maintenance data, which again, it was a true maintenance where there was nothing done for a long period of time, and they checked again, which is a real test of maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those data were more variable. However, this was a challenging skill for these participants, so you might expect to see that type of drop-off if the skills are not maintained over time.
But it was still higher than baseline. So they
Still-
had nothing in baseline, and they at least had at least 50% for most of the responses
Right.
in maintenance.
Yeah. So overall, I think this was really successful, and it was a neat study to read about. I liked the video model prompt.
I did too.
Not gonna lie. They pointed out, however, that the most challenging piece of this to teach was actually the facial expression. And pretty much nobody learned that from the video model.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening when you're looking at a whole video, and the facial expression is, small and compared to sort of the proportion of the whole video, so that could have been a factor.
It might be interesting to have a video of a real close-up of a face.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah, like have just the
a eyebrows
face,
furrowed. Yeah, so that was another thing, is that for 2 participants, they were never able to teach them the lowered eyebrows, even with the manual prompt. So they had to kind of modify that. So it does seem like this facial expression piece is really difficult. But for the other participants and for the other responses, for everyone, the manual prompt was what was needed in order to change the facial expression. It is interesting, and you have to kind of wonder, I don't know, about what the behavioral mechanisms are at play there, right? Because if someone's coming in to like manipulate my face,
I'm not gonna have it.
You might see independence increase
to
before
avoid
that prompt in order to avoid that prompt. Right? It's very intrusive.
Yes.
However, that's what worked here, but I kind of agree with you, Jackie. I would like to see maybe if they changed the way the video model was presented or tried to make that cue more salient as a model in some way.
If you made it like a clip, right? Like you showed like happiness, and then you showed like the mouth, the eyes, like like for the mouth for 3 seconds. Practice the mouth, the eyes for 3 seconds, and put them all together, and then continue on.
Yeah.
Right? They do that at Sesame Street sometimes.
That's right.
I've been watching a lot of Sesame Street.
You need your puppet to be able to move their eyebrows.
Right. Yeah, and here, you need that.
Yeah.
There's no puppets here.
Yeah.
There's no puppets here.
Not in this article. Well, let's move on to the dissemination station and kind of continue this discussion, because we haven't had dissemination station in a couple episodes now. So I want to get on that dissemination train. Hark, I doth hear the train here at the dissemination station.
I'm picking up my loved one. Loved one? Loved one?
Oh no, they banged their knee.
Oh no!
What? Can I help you? So we've got 2 similar treatments that had a number of successes. Our more recent, the 2017 article did look at a much more complex series of behaviors. One of the pieces that we kind of are talking about exploring is how much of the fancy technology, puppets, video modeling, language masters was really necessary compared to just weird facial prompting and just vocal model.
So I think it's be a good question to have as a thesis, right? We could do a component analysis and maybe do this treatment package and do the dropout method, where we drop out these salient features that may not have had an effect, like the language master, the video model, and see what happens. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that would be neat. I guess that would be not maybe necessarily a component analysis. We could use it more of as a parametric analysis, right? Because we're looking at the levels of IV. But it could be a component analysis too, because maybe we don't need all of these prompts. Maybe we could do a component / parametric analysis.
You're onto something.
I mean, I'd like to see the video model you were describing, Jackie, with the sort of the zoom in,
right?
Shoo eyes, shoo mouth, and see if that just makes it a more salient cue. Look at his mouth; it's making a frowny face. Look at those eyebrows; they're raising up or going down, as eyebrows do.
Yeah, that would be fun. I would really like this.
Yeah, I'd also like to see a component of this that included some peer reaction to the participants, because that's one of the main reasons why you teach an empathetic response, is to have the child that we're trying to teach continue to be included with the peers see them as someone that they want to engage with. And if you don't respond empathetically, kids recognize that. And they often respond poorly in that situation. They think that you're mean, or you don't want to play with them, or that you're not in tune with a lot of the subtle interactions that are happening in a classroom, right? So I think it would be interesting to maybe include some just natural observation at the beginning and end, or set up some scenarios that you could ensure that you're getting opportunities for response to see how did the other kids respond to the child when they did or did not engage in empathetic responses, and how included were they in the classroom, or do you have some type of measure you can look at there? So that's the real social validity.
Yeah.
Right. I like that.
I'd also want to see, I understand why in the article, for maintenance purposes, there was no training and then maintenance probe. But realistically, we would want to see this skill be acquired and then maintained at a higher rate. So are there components that you would need to have as part of a maintenance package? Would it be that sort of peer, more peer training? Would it be doing some sort of a video model self-recording? Like, let's watch some clips of you, like, oh, how did you score yourself in terms of your response to when Billy banged his knee? Or would it be something more along the lines of like behavioral skills training, of just that feedback of like, remember, when somebody makes that face, they're probably sad, and you should show
that.
empathetic sad response, whatever you want to call it in shorthand, and see, are any of those helpful at maintaining higher rates of empathetic responding?
Yeah, I like that.
To help with follow-up.
Yeah, that's good.
Whew, we've come up with some good
ideas. I mean, these two articles, as much as I think they use the puppets and it seemed like they're doing some kind of wacky things, were really very straightforward for a very complex social response.
These are good articles.
Real
they broke it down really nicely. They taught the skills well.
So if you were to say to a preschool teacher, kids with autism, or even just kids who just are not showing empathetic behavior, what are the components here, just from what we know, that you would suggest they start with? Like, what are the pieces that you feel are important? Just
the verbal response.
That's what I was gonna say too. Wow, twinsies! I would start with that first. I don't know if I'd necessarily teach the motor response, because right now people don't really like people touching each other, like in general.
Oh, the patting the shoulder,
like patting on the shoulder, because that can turn into like a punch. Like you don't know, but
what is like a microaggression? What are they talking about?
Well, like sometimes kids don't know how to modulate their own force, right? So when one pat turns, like when they're like, excuse me, and poking you, and then you have a bruise that day because of a bruise. But I like the idea of some sort of motor response, but I would definitely teach that vocal response too, because that's what people would attend to. I don't necessarily come and touch you. Well, I do, but most people don't come and touch you if they don't necessarily know you, right? Like,
I just caught that, Jackie.
Yeah,
she does.
Most people don't necessarily won't touch you if they don't know you.
Yeah.
Right?
I think another piece that's not noted here, but if you're teaching preschoolers, would be get the attending of the other person first, and then the verbal response.
Right. Because you don't want someone to say, like, are you okay? And they're in the living room not looking at you, looking out the window. Right. Yeah.
I think that was in one of the discussions. Which were the components of the empathetic response that were the most salient or the most important? I mean, I like you're talking about, Jackie. I never touch anybody if I can avoid it, but I'm sure I say things like, "Oh, is everything okay?" And I feel like I'm being empathetic, but I wonder, do people really think like that Rob's a jerk because he never comes over and puts his hands on his breast to show, "Oh, how sad I am for you," or whatever the response was, or he doesn't put his hand on me. And
don't when it works. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't put your hands on anyone at work, Rob.
Yeah, don't.
I think you're okay. I think in today's society, you're really not supposed to be touching people.
That's fair. So, like, my kid fell down the stairs today, and it's like,
whoop, 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 whoop. Which stairs?
The front stairs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I said, "Are you okay?" And I got no response.
They're like,
and I said again, and I still got no response. I was like, "Oh, I guess I better go find him and see." And so I waited, to make sure he had the attending response. And he was like, "Yes." Like, are you fine? Do you need me? And he said, "No." I said, "Okay." I guess you're fine. So I never did the gesture or the touching. I just did the attending and the verbal.
Yeah.
The intonation, too.
You did the intonation.
I did. The intonation was there. The facial expression was there, but he couldn't see me, so that didn't matter. That was just for my own benefit.
Okay, so maybe
he's fine.
Response,
you weren't here.
The facial expression.
And then the vocal response. Yeah, I think those are the most salient.
We could certainly, the future generations could look into those pieces to be a little more factual than our just kind of
what do you think?
Educated guesses,
yeah.
but those.
He knew I cared. right? And that's the point.
Did you give him a social validity Likert scale after this
No.
interaction?
I like that. Excuse me. Based on this previous
How
interaction that we
empathetic
had,
would you say I was? Am I a 5?
Strongly? No,
Deanna
like,
Troi from Star Trek The Next Generation?
I like this. Now, please answer. 1, strongly agree. 2, agree. 3, neutral. 4, disagree. 5, strongly disagree. Please respond. I like that.
My mother made me fill out surveys about her mothering.
Really?
No, that's what he would say
Oh.
about me.
Oh,
I was like, your mom does not look like a survey type of mom.
no.
She
Oh my
would
gosh.
never.
I actually probably would. That's something that I think is very interesting. Maybe I'll do that.
Give
I
your kids a
wouldn't.
survey.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
I'm going to do it right now because she can't circle anything. I'd be like, Sylvie, use this big crayon and circle, and then I'll like hand over
Sure.
hand.
Start
Then you'll
valid
text me. Like,
response.
she circled a 5.
Yeah.
She circled a 1. A 1.
She can't do
Thinks I'm
anything. I know,
terrible.
right? And then I'll rip it up and be like, no! So, pro tip.
Pro tip.
Do not give your kids like art scales on your
Nope.
parenting.
So we've got a couple components here that I think are really promising, and hopefully there'll be some more research in this avenue to continue sort of drilling into what are the biggest components. But it was really nice to see that empathy, just like many other social skills, is teachable, is able to be defined, and is able to be taught using just a lot of basic technologies. Hooray!
Yeah, and like other pro-social behavior, we do need to ask ourselves the question, are we teaching form or are we teaching function?
Right.
Right? So this breaks down beautifully the form of empathy. But what we don't necessarily know is this behavior going to maintain on its own with just the natural consequences available in the natural environment for engaging in empathetic response, which would be teaching the function of that behavior. The limited follow-up data that we have from this study would suggest maybe not, that perhaps we're not there yet. Again,
Right.
This is the hardest thing for a lot of kids with autism to do,
Mm-hmm.
is to have this type of social interaction and understanding and maintain behavior solely with social reinforcers in
Right.
place, right? So there's more work to be done in that regard as well.
Sure.
And that limitation's not limited to just empathy. It's that whole range of behavior that we mentioned, the perspective taking, joint attention.
These pro-social behaviors.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Turn taking, sharing.
Right. So that's important to talk about too.
All right. Well, before we go, I want to make sure that our listeners, if they are interested in applying for continuing education credits, get our second secret code word, which is googly. Googly, like great googly moogly, or great googly eyes on that Cookie Monster puppet you used in your empathy training. Cookie Monster, you seem hungry. Hand on chest. Other hand held out with items.
Googly.
Googly.
Me love cookie.
Well, thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Diana, for this great topic on empathy. This felt like a kind of a classic episode, like some of our earlier ones, where
Yeah,
it's
that
just like,
was
here's
nice.
some research and let's talk about it.
I
It's
missed
pretty
it.
solid research because we've been going into some other
Murky
more,
waters.
not murky waters, but more discussion based topics.
Shark infested.
I don't think quite that bad. We also want to thank our listeners very much. We hope you enjoyed our show. Please let us know how you thought by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play. We might be on Spotify. It says we are on our podcast host page. You can also email us directly at abainsidetrack@gmail.com or find us on Facebook and on Twitter as ABA Inside Track. The Facebook page also has some interesting articles that we find from around the world related to behavioral science and sometimes autism. We've had some really nice discussions recently about the opioid crisis and how behavior analysis could try to resolve that one. We just tackle small things on the Facebook page and all. Oh, and one final reminder. If you have not listened to our last preview episode or haven't checked out one of our Facebook pages, we are in the middle of Autism Awareness Month here. Well, I guess that's worldwide now, right?
Yeah,
Autism
yeah.
Awareness Month. It's not just an American thing. It's everywhere. And if you have not heard, for the month of April, we are going to be donating 100% of any of our CE processing fees that we get in to Autism Compassion Africa. Please listen to our last preview episode for some information about them. We also could go to the Facebook page or the website. We'll have a link up to check them out. They're a great organization doing some really much needed work for treating children with autism in Ghana. And all of the money this month is going to go directly to Autism Compassion Africa. So if you've been thinking, you know what, I want to get a couple CEs, I've been waiting a little bit, go ahead and get them all this month. Because all of that money is going to be going to a very worthy cause. Not that we're not worthy, but we're not as worthy a cause as Autism Compassion Africa. And we want to make sure we can help them out as much as possible. I also want to make sure that we thank Kyle Sturry for giving us that great interstitial musical theme. Thanks again, Kyle. Everyone else, thank you so much for listening. Thanks again, Jackie and Diana. We'll be back next week with a preview episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.